I showed up at Melissa's grand opening thinking I was doing the supportive husband thing. She'd been working on this law firm for over 2 years, and despite the long nights, the endless meetings, the trips she claimed were just networking, I still stood by her. She wanted elegance, so I wore the charcoal suit she picked out for me last Christmas, and even brought a bottle of that overpriced champagne she liked, the one I had to drive across the city to get, because it had to be French and cold. The event was hosted in one of those sleek downtown venues with glass walls, white marble floors, and an army of staff in black ties gliding between crowds like ghosts. There were at least 200 people there, local press, law school professors, partners from other firms, and more unfamiliar faces than I could count. As soon as I stepped in, I knew something was off. Heads turned, not in the admiring, haze the supportive spouse kind of way, but more like they were trying not to laugh out loud. Some just stared. Others exchanged glances, whispering behind half-filled champagne flutes. I brushed it off, thinking maybe I had something on my suit, or they were just snobs. I caught Melissa across the room, standing near the podium, all done up in a white dress that looked more wedding than business. She didn't smile when she saw me. She smirked. That smug, crooked smile she gave when she knew something you didn't. Before I could even reach her, one of her interns, some kid barely out of undergrad, probably paid in experience and empty compliments, handed me an envelope. "You'll want to read this before the speech," he said, and vanished before I could ask anything. Confused, I opened it. Legal papers. Divorce papers. My name. Her signature already there. I didn't have time to process it before Melissa took the mic and tapped it twice, calling everyone to attention like she was about to announce a merger. She opened with thanking the guests, her team, her mentors. Then right there in front of the media, clients, and God knows who else, she said it. "This firm represents a new chapter for me, not just professionally but personally. My first client, and final loose end, is actually here tonight. Brandon, thank you for being the test run. But this is where our story ends." People actually clapped, laughed. One woman even raised a glass in my direction like she was toasting my humiliation. Melissa beamed like she had just won a damn award. And me? I stood there in the middle of it all, holding that envelope, realizing this wasn't some cruel joke or publicity stunt. This was planned, scripted, and everyone, except me, had a copy of the script. I looked at her, at that glassy-eyed pride on her face. I did the only thing I could do. I walked up to her, took the pen she had dramatically left on the podium, signed the papers without flinching, and handed them back. I smiled, not because I was fine, but because I refused to give her the show she wanted. Then I walked out. No yelling, no begging, no breakdown, just silence. As I left, I could hear the music start up again behind me, hear the clinking of glasses and the resumption of small talk, as if ending a marriage in front of a live audience was just another form of entertainment. She thought she was making a statement. What she didn't realize was that she wasn't closing a chapter. She was burning the whole book, and eventually, she'd understand that ashes don't build empires. I was barely out the door when the first call came in. Then another. Then dozens. My phone buzzed so violently in my pocket it felt like it was about to catch fire. I didn't need to look to know who it was. Melissa's little stunt, that carefully choreographed public execution of our marriage, had just lit the fuse on a bomb she had no idea she'd planted herself. I stepped in the backseat of my car, shut the door behind me, and made one call. Just one. No yelling. No threats. No explanations. I said 5 words. Pull everything. All of it. Now. Then I hung up. For 21 years, I built Whitaker Strategic Partners from nothing but a $40,000 loan from my father and the hours most people reserve for sleep. I didn't inherit wealth. I earned every dollar with grit, risk, and instinct honed over 2 decades of late nights and brutal deals. What started as a gamble in a cramped office with 2 employees and secondhand furniture became a $190 million private equity empire. We don't advertise. We don't post on LinkedIn. We acquire, restructure, and rebuild companies from the bones up. Quietly, cleanly, efficiently. Power without noise. That's always been my style. Melissa never really understood that. She liked flash, designer labels, branded gift boxes, stage photo shoots, all the trappings of success, even if none of it was truly hers. And I never said anything. I let her play her role while I paid the bills. The truth was, every piece of her so-called independent law firm existed because of me. The downtown lease, the sleek office design, her staff salaries, the marketing team that rebranded her image from obscure junior attorney to rising legal powerhouse. All of it. $18.5 million. Wired over time, through layered investment vehicles she didn't even bother to understand. To her, it was just support from a loving husband. To me, it was a calculated investment. I believed in her once. More than she'll ever know. She thought she was humiliating me in front of a room full of people who mattered. But what she really did was remind me how disposable loyalty is to some. That's fine. Business taught me a long time ago that leverage doesn't come from emotion. It comes from control. And Melissa gave me all the control I needed the moment she allowed her ego to outgrow her understanding. By the time my car reached the end of the block, my phone showed 380 missed calls. Melissa, her CFO, her firm's bank, her HR rep, even her newly hired brand strategist. They were all scrambling. They had no idea the moment I made that call, the foundation under them was already in free fall. Bank accounts frozen. Payroll lines recalled. Lease guarantees revoked. Marketing contracts terminated under performance clauses. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to make a scene. All I had to do was stop the money. And without the money, all Melissa had left was a dress, a microphone, and a room full of people who were already watching the floor disappear beneath her. 13 years ago, I met Melissa at a charity gala in Austin, one of those black tie events filled with overpriced wine, staged laughter, and carefully polished introductions. I wasn't supposed to be there that night. I had just flown in from a deal in Denver and nearly skipped it altogether, but something pulled me in. I still remember how she moved through the crowd like she owned the room. Every word crisp, every glance deliberate. She was 29, magnetic in the kind of way that didn't ask for attention. It just happened. Her reputation preceded her. A legal prodigy. They called her. Brilliant. Unrelenting. The youngest associate at her firm to argue federal litigation without blinking. She saw me before I saw her. Said I looked out of place, like someone with better things to do, which was her way of starting a conversation. We talked for 10 minutes that felt like 2 hours. I learned she grew up in El Paso, first-generation college grad, fought her way in a law school with nothing but raw talent and fury. She didn't believe in luck, only leverage. That was her word. Leverage. I was hooked. We married a year later at the Fairmont, with a guest list that read like a who's who of corporate Texas. She wanted a wedding that felt like destiny announcing itself, and I gave her that. Everything from the string quartet to the imported orchids flown in from Colombia. She planned it like a closing argument. Immaculate. Intentional. Without a single note out of place. I still remember her vows. She talked about building something bigger than either of us could alone. A life. A legacy. A partnership forged in ambition. She wanted her own firm someday. Not just a law office, but a corporate force. A name that would live on buildings. I told her I would fund it, back it, stand behind it. And I did. I carried that promise through 13 years of work. I covered the bills when she took pay cuts to move firms. I stayed up with her before trial dates, watching her walk holes into the carpet, rehearsing arguments. I flew with her to conferences, waited in the lobby with her coat, while she charmed judges and clients alike. I gave her space when she said she needed time. I made room in my life for her dream, always. But 2 years ago, things shifted. The late nights didn't feel like work anymore. She started coming home at 2 a.m. and would immediately jump in the shower, always with a flimsy excuse about court prep or strategy meetings that never quite lined up. Her phone, once left charging in the kitchen without a thought, now followed her into every room, every corner, like a shadow. She started sleeping in new lingerie, lace sets that still had the tags attached when I found them hidden in drawers. But she never wore them for me. There was a new perfume, too. Not the warm, amber scent I used to catch on her collar, but something sharper, unfamiliar, expensive, a scent that didn't belong to us. I noticed everything. The missed calls she wouldn't explain, the strange new contacts in her calendar labeled only by initials. I saw the way she changed how she looked at me. Not angry, just distant. Like I was slowly being erased from the picture she was painting of her future. And through all of it, I said nothing. I waited. I listened. I watched as the woman I fell in love with turned into someone who didn't even flinch when she lied to my face. Looking back, the betrayal didn't begin with the divorce papers or that performance at her launch party. It started quietly, with a glance held too long at a message she didn't want me to see, with the way she started closing doors when she talked on the phone. It began the moment she decided that her ambition needed space, and I was in the way. When I decided to hire a private investigator, it wasn't out of revenge. It was clarity I wanted. Closure. I needed to know exactly when the truth between us had died. Not the version she paraded in public, but the one whispered in hotel rooms and buried beneath encrypted messages. I contacted Mike Ramirez, a former LAPD detective with a reputation for discretion and results. He didn't ask many questions. He didn't need to. People like him read silence the way others read headlines. Within a week, the illusion was gone. Mike's first report landed on my desk with timestamps, GPS logs, surveillance stills, and enough documented betrayal to make the air feel heavier in my office. Melissa wasn't just unfaithful. She was meticulous in her deception. At least she thought she was. Her affair was with Leonard Hayes, her senior partner from the old firm. 55 years old, married, father of 3, managing partner with a net worth built on legacy and a marriage spanning 3 decades. Publicly, he was untouchable. Privately, he was Melissa's ghost at midnight, her confidant, her banker, and her co-conspirator. There were voicemails, hushed calls from hotel balconies, her voice lower, softer than I'd heard it in years. Pictures too. Melissa and Leonard entering the Fairmont under different reservations. Receipts from boutique hotels along conference routes. They had no reason attending together. One text thread was over 100 messages long. Not just flirting, but strategy. Plans. Mentions of when it's all ours. And you won't need to pretend anymore. I remember reading that line 3 times, hands cold and chest hollow. That was the moment I stopped being her husband in her world. I was just the funding. It got worse. Leonard, in all his brilliance, had invested $6 million into her firm. Not from a business account. Not through legal means. It came from a family trust, his wife's side. A generational fund meant for his children's education and estate assets. Redirected quietly through a shell LLC and dumped straight into Melissa's launch account. His wife had no idea. Not yet. Then there were Melissa's parents. They mortgaged their home, the house she grew up in, for a $3.2 million loan to help their daughter's dream take flight. Her father's name was on the second lien. Her mother co-signed the personal guarantee. They thought they were investing in legacy. They had no idea they were throwing gasoline onto a fire someone else had already lit. But the part that made me pause, the part that made it all worth it, was buried in the fine print she never read. Melissa had rushed to launch, obsessed with beating the timeline of some imaginary competition. She was so caught up in optics, the brand reveal, the gala, the press coverage, that she never truly read the incorporation documents. She signed everything my lawyers sent over. Every clause, every writer, every line. I owned controlling interest in the firm. My attorneys drafted it so that my position couldn't be diluted without unanimous consent, mine included. Legal recall rights, buried deep within the third appendix, allowed me to pull capital, dissolve executive privileges, and reclaim voting authority with a single action if certain thresholds were met. Thresholds like fraud, infidelity tied to business partnerships, misappropriation of funds. She handed me the matches. I didn't even have to strike them. The moment I walked into the ballroom at the Atlanta Ritz-Carlton, I could feel the shift in the air. It wasn't surprise. It was discomfort, the kind of tension that ripples through a room when people realize the punchline of their private joke has just entered the space. Everyone turned to look. Some smiled nervously. Others glanced away. A few whispered, not even trying to hide it. I heard it clearly from a woman near the bar. That's the trial husband. That was the name she gave me. A test run. A stepping stone. Melissa stood under the chandelier, draped in a gown too white to be anything but deliberate. Her hand rested on Leonard's hip. Not in affection, but in possession. His smile was smug, the kind that belongs to men who believe consequences are reserved for other people. He didn't even look surprised to see me, just nodded like I was early to my own funeral. Melissa spotted me and broke away from the circle of sycophants clinging to her every word. She approached with the calculated confidence of someone who had rehearsed every angle, every expression. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask how I was. Instead, she reached into her clutch and pulled out a stack of papers. I thought we could make it official tonight, she said. A clean break. Fitting, don't you think? You'll be our first case. I didn't speak. I didn't ask questions. I took the pen she offered and signed exactly where she pointed. I didn't read a word of it. Not because I trusted her, but because I'd written the ending long before she planned this show. The paper wasn't a contract. It was a trapdoor, and she had no idea she was the one standing on it. She smiled as I handed the signed documents back to her, basking in the spectacle. People around us clapped. Someone even joked about sending it to the press. Melissa laughed and raised her glass. I didn't say a word. I didn't flinch. I turned, adjusted my cuff, and walked out. No scene. No bitterness. Just precision. The second the ballroom doors closed behind me, I reached for my phone and made 3 calls. The first was to my attorney. Trigger clause, I said. That was all he needed. We had spent months preparing for this moment. My signature wasn't surrender. It was a legal key. The final condition required to activate full control of the firm's assets under the recall clause buried in her own paperwork. The moment my pen hit that page, Melissa had unknowingly authorized the beginning of her firm's dismantling. The second call was to the bank. Escrow holds, capital freezes, executive privileges revoked. By the time the champagne hit her lips, every operating account tied to the firm was in review, pending investigation for financial misconduct tied to Leonard's illegal investment. The third call was to Ramirez. Send the package, I said. Every voicemail, every text, every receipt, every hidden wire transfer. All of it, sent anonymously to Leonard's wife, his board, and his children's trust attorneys. Let him explain that over breakfast. Melissa thought she was writing a headline. What she actually did was sign away the last bit of leverage she had. And the best part was, she handed me the pen herself. By the time I stepped into my penthouse, the city below was quiet, unaware that someone's empire had just started to bleed from the inside out. I loosened my tie, poured 2 fingers of bourbon into a crystal glass, and stood at the window while the lights of Atlanta flickered like static across the skyline. Behind me, my phone was vibrating steadily on the marble counter, screen lighting up over and over with Melissa's name. I hadn't read a single one yet. I didn't need to. I already knew how the story was unfolding on her end, because I'd written it. The first call, made the second I left the Ritz, was to my attorney, Joshua Crane. I didn't need to explain. He picked up and waited. Trigger protocol blackout. I said, calm, deliberate. That was the code we'd spent months preparing for. Within minutes, every financial lifeline connected to her firm was severed. Corporate accounts drained. Investor pools frozen. Credit extensions revoked. Her payroll system redirected to a compliance audit queue. The cards in her employees' wallets, useless. Her client accounts, flagged for investigation under breach of contract, clauses tied to undisclosed conflicts of interest. $18.5 million, not just withdrawn, but surgically extracted from beneath her, leaving the shell of her firm with nothing but overhead and unpaid invoices. The second call went to Ramirez. I didn't even wait for a greeting. Release the files, I said, and he chuckled once before the line clicked off. Less than an hour later, a digital avalanche began to hit inboxes across the state. Leonard's wife received everything: hotel receipts, burner phone records, photos, text archives spanning over a year. The kind of documentation you don't come back from. Simultaneously, anonymous packets were sent to the State Bar, to Melissa's early investors, and to her previous firm's managing board. Each set tailored to its recipient: breach of fiduciary duty, financial misconduct, reputational risk, and most damning of all, intent to defraud. Her first case had just become a statewide scandal with her name stapled to the top of every page. The third call, maybe the most personal, was to her old boss at the firm she left to launch her empire. The same man she once called a dinosaur behind closed doors, said he lacked vision. Thought you'd want to know what Leonard's been funding with your client lists, I said. You might want to audit the last 2 years. He was silent for a few seconds, then just said, understood, and hung up. I imagined the look on his face as he opened the forwarded documents Ramirez had queued for him. There's a particular kind of fury that only comes when a firm realizes it's been used as a stepping stone for something built on deception. Melissa hadn't just burned bridges, she detonated them, and now the fire was headed right back toward her. By midnight, I was halfway through the glass, watching the slow, pathetic unraveling of her confidence, one notification at a time. 17 unread messages, then 28, then 63. At 92, she was still pretending she was in control. Little barbed texts: you always were a coward, you'll regret this, that signature doesn't scare me. But by 113, the tone changed. What's going on? My bank just froze our accounts. Leonard's wife showed up at my office. At 128, did you do something? And by 150, please call me. We need to talk. I set the phone down. Let ring. Let her sit in the silence she created. Everything she'd built on deception, betrayal, and arrogance was collapsing in real time, and I wasn't going to stop it. I was going to watch, not because I needed revenge, but because I owed it to the version of myself that believed she was worth building a future with. At 9:07 p.m., the first real message came in. No more pride. No performance. Just a single sentence. Where's the money? 10 minutes later, she followed up with, you drained everything. You'll ruin me. At 9:41, it shifted again. My parents. They'll lose their house. Her desperation, once hidden behind designer heels and courtroom posture, was now spilling across my screen in the form of fragmented pleas. I didn't respond. I just sat in the dim light of my living room, bourbon in hand, letting the silence stretch. At 10:15 p.m., the elevator pinged. I didn't have to check the screen to know it was her. The camera feed outside the penthouse showed Melissa standing there, hair a mess, makeup streaked, clutching her phone like it was the only thing keeping her upright. I opened the door without a word. She walked in slowly, hesitating at the threshold like the air inside might burn her. Her heels clicked against the hardwood until she stopped a few feet in, looking around the room like it might swallow her whole. "Please," she said, voice cracking. "I need to talk to you." She didn't wait for permission. She stepped in, stumbled to the couch, and sat down like her body couldn't hold itself anymore. Her eyes were red, lips trembling, and for the first time in years, I saw something real beneath the polish. Not power, not strategy, just collapse. "It wasn't supposed to go like this," she whispered. "The firm, it was supposed to be my future. Everything I worked for. You can't just erase it. Please undo it." I sat across from her. Calm, clear. The weight of everything I knew settled between us like glass shards on the table. "You signed everything without reading it," I said. "That was your first mistake." She shook her head. "Brandon, I cut her off. You violated the infidelity clause. The conflict of interest clause. You took funds from Leonard Hayes, who redirected money from a private trust without disclosure, and tied your firm to that fraud. And then you used your parents' equity as collateral without a financial cushion. That's breach of fiduciary duty." She blinked, stunned into silence. "You didn't build a firm," I continued. "You built a scandal with a logo." Her shoulders dropped, breath catching in her throat. She looked around like the room might offer a way out, like some invisible hand would come and undo the mess she made. Then she buried her face in her palms and broke. Not quiet tears, not the elegant kind that fits into a redemption arc. She sobbed, raw loud, shaking. But I didn't move. "I can't fix this," she gasped. "I don't have the money. I can't explain it to them." "You don't have to," I said. "I'll cover your parents' mortgage. I'll put them on a payment plan. Manageable, fair, private. They don't deserve to lose their home for your ambition." She lifted her head slowly, eyes meeting mine, searching for some trace of softness, of forgiveness. "There's nothing else," I said. "Not for you." She didn't argue. She didn't yell. She just sat there, on the couch she used to curl up on after long nights of pretending she still loved me, and let the truth finally settle in. She wasn't the future. She was the lesson. Within 48 hours, the ripple turned into a tidal wave. Leonard Hayes was disbarred with expedited proceedings, the kind reserved for clear-cut violations of ethical and legal standards. The evidence was overwhelming. The trust fund diversion alone was enough to sink his career, but the affair with Melissa, combined with fraudulent disclosures, made sure the door behind him slammed shut for good. His wife didn't just file for divorce. She eviscerated him in court. Asset seizures, injunctions, public statements. Whatever reputation he thought he'd protected with polished suits and quiet boardroom whispers was gone, shredded by the weight of the truth he tried to conceal. He moved into a one-bedroom apartment on the edge of the city, no longer surrounded by glass towers and luxury vehicles. Now it was cheap blinds, generic mailboxes, and a growing list of missed calls from creditors. Melissa's fall wasn't as swift, but it was far more public. Within a week, investors began to pull out, filing lawsuits for misrepresentation and breach of contract. Her firm's bank accounts, already frozen, were now dissected by legal auditors. Contractors abandoned projects. Clients cut ties. Her carefully crafted brand, the social media posts, the magazine spreads, the staged photo shoots in front of courthouse steps, all vanished in a wave of deleted bios and silence. The firm collapsed under the weight of its own dishonesty. Her staff scattered. Her office lease was terminated, equipment repossessed. And the whispers? They turned into headlines. She tried to pivot, to salvage what she could, but the legal world isn't kind to those who pretend they're bigger than the system that created them. She was no longer the prodigy, no longer the rising star on the fast track to senior partner. She was a cautionary tale, told in conference rooms and passed around in group chats among attorneys who once envied her climb. 6 months later, I ran into her at a continuing legal education seminar downtown. One of those dry, mandatory sessions packed into a gray conference center, full of bored attorneys checking their phones and nodding through lectures about new compliance standards. I didn't expect to see her. She was sitting near the back, alone, her notebook nearly empty, her blazer a little worn at the edges. Her badge said Associate Attorney. No firm name, no title, just a name, hers, now stripped of the weight it once carried. She saw me before I saw her. Our eyes met briefly. She didn't flinch. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. She just nodded once, small, quiet, almost imperceptible, but I understood it clearly. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't regret. It was acknowledgement, silent recognition of what had happened, what she did, what she lost. I said nothing. I didn't stop. I didn't glance back. She had called me her test-run husband, a placeholder for the real life she imagined would come after me. But the truth is, she was right about one thing. I was the test. I had given her loyalty, patience, resources, and trust. And in return, she had chosen ambition over honesty, illusion over partnership. She gambled with everything and lost it all. She failed spectacularly. And I walked out of that room with everything she thought she'd taken from me. Peace, purpose, and my name untouched.